Right. Um, and Andy Grace, if you can just monitor the waiting room, that'd be great. Um, Perfect. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Chris Riles, pronouns they, them. I am the anti-hunger advocate here at Tennessee Justice Center. Um, and thank you for joining us today. I know we are a week out from Thanksgiving, so thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. And we'll go ahead and get started. So this is our LGBTQ plus hunger webinar. We do these webinars monthly on topics related to anti-hunger advocacy and work. Notably, I wanted to make sure that we did the LGBTQ plus webinar outside of June because June is always inundated with pride themed things, and we are LGBTQ plus all year round. So thanks for being here and doing this. We will be sending slides out afterwards in a follow-up email. So if you want any of these slides, you will get them as long as you registered. Here's a list of all of our anti-hunger staff here at TJC. And we have some people who do WIC, SNAP, and several other things. So TJC, Tennessee Justice Center, we've been around for 28 years. I think it's actually 28 and a half at this point. We work to help families navigate the public benefits programs like SNAP, WIC, and TennCare and child nutrition. Um, and we do advocacy around these programs as well using our case work. And as you can see here, what we do specifically for anti-hunger is similar. We work directly with clients, which informs our advocacy. And that is how we interface with the agencies and the government to help make these programs work better for Tennesseans and remove barriers, systemic issues, that kind of thing. This is a very non-exhaustive list of the programs that we work with. Um, and there are many more that we work with, but this is a good overview of some of the acronyms you might hear us talk about. So jumping right into it. So why LGBTQ plus hunger? So when we think about hunger, we think about this population because nationally, 15 to 20% of LGBTQ plus people face food insufficiency in 2023, which is a common trend, and that is around twice as often as people who are not part of this community. In addition, 20% of people in this community who are in high school experience reporting hunger, and this is 33% higher for people who are not white. So this intersecting identities really kind of exacerbates some of these issues. LGBTQ plus hunger is affected by systemic disparities along the vectors of things like poverty, housing, transportation, education, healthcare, and many, many more. And again, these intersecting identities, such as race, sex, and disability status, are always going to compound each other. So here I have pulled some numbers to talk about what's happening in Tennessee. So as you can see from these numbers from the Williams Institute and the Gallup polls and the census, in Tennessee, there are 223,000 people who identify as LGBTQ, and 29% of people raising children are LGBTQ. There are some state-specific issues here in Tennessee that really affect the hunger that we go through. Um, and that is going to be obviously our state legislation is actively hostile to queer people. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but yeah, it is a thing that is definitely necessary to mention. Um, there are other things that cause a lot of economic instability in housing, employment, other sectors. This is going to be things that are both codified into law and rule, but also a lot of things that are sociocultural. And then, of course, Tennessee is a very rural state. There are a lot of rural areas, and in rural areas, these issues can be compounded. So these are all things to keep an eye on. And as I mentioned, there are some unique issues that we face here. Cultural and religious norms cause a lot of people in our community to be ostracized and neglected socially. This sometimes results in abandonment of children and people who are not technically children but still need support from family units. And because of this, nationally, 40% of people who are homeless and in the youth category, which is 18 to 24, identify as LGBTQ plus. This is much, much higher than the general population of LGBTQ plus people. Um, there are a lot of things that happen, such as lack of family support, lack of support from faith communities and social networks that can degrade when a person comes out or is outed in some cases. These can cause things like mental health issues and notably employment outcomes. There are very few protections available for people when it comes to being discriminated against in work and housing. Um, Again, LGBTQ plus people are 2.7 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than non-queer people. This is hate crimes, but also things that are just systemic crime. All of this can compound to reduce our access to economic stability and upward mobility in our economic status. And of course, all of that is directly tied to our ability to feed ourselves adequately. Um, Going back to the issue on the legislation, so Tennessee, uh, we have more anti-LGBTQ plus laws than any other state. We are leading the charge on legislating queer people. To that end, 24 bills have passed the General Assembly since 2015. That is not all the bills that were introduced. There are a number that were struck down for various reasons. I obviously don't have a full list of those here, but just know that this is things like gender affirming care, artistic expression. This is the drag bill that passed that we hear a lot about. Who can use which bathrooms? Who can participate in which sports? What can be talked about inside of schools? Gender markers on official documents. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just know that in the state of Tennessee, you cannot change your gender marker on your birth certificate if you have a birth certificate from Tennessee, even if you can change it on every other piece of documentation and you have a court order. So let's pivot to SNAP. Let's talk about SNAP. This is the reason why we're here today. So Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, you probably also know it as food stamps. This was the former name of it. It is a wonderful program that allows people to feed themselves. Um, it allows you to buy food from approved retailers with an electronic benefits transfer card that works a lot like a debit card. And it is a great program to help mitigate hunger for people from all low-income backgrounds. As far as our economy goes, SNAP is also beneficial to the economy. There are around 6,400 Tennessee grocers and authorized SNAP retailers in the state. This number obviously goes up and down every day. Um, as far as economic growth goes, the amount of money that's being drawn down from the federal government contributes $1.8 billion to the local Tennessee economy. And for every dollar that we draw down in benefits, between $1.50 and $1.80 of local economic activity, because if you're using your SNAP dollars at the store, you're probably also buying toilet paper and other things that SNAP can't buy. So it really helps to stimulate growth. That being said, there are some specific barriers that come into play when talking about LGBTQ people. Um, Through the process of applying for and utilizing SNAP benefits, some things can occur. One is going to be different information across verification documents. As part of SNAP, you have to submit documents to prove your identity, prove your rental agreements, things like this. Um, there can be some barriers if, for instance, your birth certificate says one name, but your rental agreement says another, but your driver's license says something else. Um, and as I mentioned, Tennessee doesn't allow you to change your gender marker on some documents like birth certificates. So this could cause, some kinks in the chain. even with the most, affirming caseworker on your case, it could cause some issues if they're just confused about what's happening. There is also the issue of potential discrimination. There is the risk of prejudice with presumed discrepancies between paperwork and personal presentation. If you go into an office and you go by one name, let's say you go by Stephanie, you go into the office though, and if you're a transgender woman, that person might see you as a man, or if you're on the phone to do your interview, you might have a name that presents as one gender, but your voice is deep, and they think, oh, am I actually talking to the person that I'm supposed to? These are all instances that we as LGBTQ plus people really have to think about when accessing programs like this. Um, and there's also the issue of having to disclose to the government what is happening in your personal situation, especially in a deeply red state like Tennessee. Um, People might not be willing to disclose that they are in a same-sex couple or that they, whatever the case may be. Um, this could be either because it is a perceived prejudice or an actual prejudice that they have faced in the past. That being said, this could cause people to maybe perhaps leave somebody in their SNAP household off of the SNAP application because they don't want to disclose to the government that they're in a same-sex marriage. All these things happen all the time. There are also some issues with unclear definitions. The way that SNAP is administered is by the household. And if a person is unclear about what constitutes a household, we're together, we're not married, but does the state recognize this? Is the government going to recognize this? Chosen families are also very common in our community, especially in the trans community, where the only people you may have to support you in your life are your other fellow trans people and your trans elders. There may be some issues understanding that, yes, if we all live in the same house, we can apply as a household, and the state would recognize that. Maybe there's misunderstanding about that. Um, that could also cause people not to want to seek out uh, aid. Another big one is going to be stigma and fear. Cultural shame and internalized fear can cause people to avoid the process altogether. They say, it's not worth it. It's not worth me going through all this, possibly re-traumatizing myself to, defend my situation to the government, which leads, of course, to mistrust of the government because of all the 24 bills that have passed and all the ones that didn't pass, fear of being outed, having negative experiences in the past with government programs, all of these things, being misgendered. Some people might say, well, I don't know if I go into this government office, I'm going to get called he, I'm going to get called her, I'm going to get called whatever, and just maybe not want to go through the trauma of that. These are all things that can cause a person to not be able to access the program adequately. Um, Another thing that I'll mention is the time limits. Time limits are a big part of the SNAP program that cause issues in a lot of different ways, but here specifically, I'll talk about it. For those of you who don't know, many people on the program are classified as ABODs, able-bodied adults without dependents. That is anybody who is 18 to 54 and doesn't have care of a child or any disabilities or anybody 60 plus in the household. Um, these people must work or volunteer an average of 20 hours a week or 80 hours a month in order to stay on the program after 3 months. There are a bunch of exemptions that apply to this. If you're pregnant, recently added were veterans, people who are unhoused, and people who are formerly in foster care. When I send these slides out later, there's a link here that's got all of the things you can use it as an exemption. I bring this up because people in our community are often underemployed and unemployed at much higher rates than other populations. This is, of course, even deeper for intersecting identities, such as people of color and people with disabilities. And so these are things that, even if a person maybe wants to be meeting these work requirements, may have trouble finding ways to do so. And it may be working, but it might not be a type of work that is recognized by the government for the purposes of work requirements. There's just things to keep in mind. Um, I'll take just a quick beat to ask if there's any questions. I know I've gone through a lot. So if you've got a question, please feel free to come off of mute, raise your hand with the raise hand function, put it in the chat, and I'll take just a moment to answer any questions you may have. All right. Well, we'll move on to WIC then. So WIC is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women's Infants and Children. It is a mouthful, so we just call it WIC. This is similar to SNAP, but it works different. It is health support and food benefits for people who are pregnant, who have recently had a child, or have children up to the age of 5 until their 5th birthday. It also has a card associated with it, though it doesn't distribute dollars. It distributes your ability to buy certain products. There's also an amazing amount of support and counseling for nutrition and breastfeeding and other social services and referrals to health. It's an excellent program. There's 4 types of eligibility for this. You have to meet all 4. Categorical is basically who you are. There's a list of people that we'll go into. Income, the income levels are much higher than for SNAP. So if you make too much for SNAP, but you meet the categorical, you might still be eligible for WIC. You have to be a Tennessee resident to get WIC in Tennessee, and you have to have some sort of nutritional risk. This is not going to be really an issue for most people. If you're under the income level, you're likely already at a nutritional risk. As for categorical, this is how this works. Like I said, you have to be either pregnant or recently had a child, or recently ended a pregnancy, have an infant or a child who has not had their 5th birthday yet. And notably, this program is open for people who are caring for a child who is eligible, but may not themselves be eligible their be their parent. So grand families are common, single fathers who aren't a woman but are, taking care of a child, foster parents. Notably, you don't have to have custody of the child in order to apply for WIC on their behalf and receive benefits. You also do not have to have immigration or citizenship status in order to get this program, which is why it's one of the good programs for people who can't access SNAP because of immigration status. There are some barriers to this program as well when it comes to this population. Unclear definitions are going to be something that can cause some people to have pause. Non-binary or transgender parents who do not identify as a woman, because it is women, infants, and children, but otherwise meet the bodily physiological requirements for participation, which I mean is able to get pregnant and chest feed. Um, there may be some confusion there, or fear of being discriminated against during the application process. Um, just know that this is not an issue for the clinics. They are going to accept anybody who is eligible, but it can cause people to maybe not want to enter the process. Household makeup is again going to be an issue for some people. Same-sex or chosen family households, kind of like we talked about a moment ago, they may complicate eligibility. Uh, complicate who thinks that they can be eligible. And it also might be a stumbling point for some caseworkers. Um, this can all be overcome. And then, of course, fear of being outed during the process is always an issue for any government program. That being said, I do want to make it clear that Tennessee WIC will work with families on a case-by-case basis. So every case, they're going to go over eligibility personally, and there's not going to be blanket denials. And anybody who is eligible can be covered. And as I said earlier, even if you're not the person who gave birth to a child, if you are the caregiver of the child, you can receive benefits on behalf of a child who's eligible if they're in your custody. So yes, WIC is a great option for all families of all makeups, and we encourage it for sure. And I will hold just another moment in case anybody has any questions about WIC before we go on to our speaker. So feel free to come off of mute or put it in the chat or raise your virtual hand. All right. Well, I'm going to hand it over to Alec. They are the program director for Nashville Launchpad, and I will go on mute. Alec, just let me know when you want me to change slides.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for letting me come here and talk about this today. I appreciate all of you taking your time. I know it's a busy time, and it seems the world has turned in many different ways as we've been kind of preparing for this. In thinking about hunger, my work has for a long time been in helping individuals be able to get out of food scarcity. For about 7 years before being at Nashville Launchpad, I was an assistant director with a downtown soup kitchen here in Nashville. There, one of the things that I really got to see was just how those who are in the experiencing homelessness, how even segmented the individual populations might be. You had many individuals who were veterans. You had individuals who had been experiencing homelessness for decades. But then you also had, some younger folks, ages 18 to 24 or so, and how different their experiences seem to be as being homeless individuals. And then with that, you have an even smaller population of those who identify as LGBTQ. And really just being able to see the idea of how much safe spaces matter to individuals and where they feel safe to go in order to get their, whether it's their housing needs or food needs met. And so that was a point that I really was able to focus on. Now here over at Nashville Launchpad, we are the only LGBTQ affirming shelter for young adults ages 18 to 24. And that population is very unique because it is a small segment of the larger homeless population in the country. I believe it's somewhere around 10%, really. And as we have these young adults who are approaching around age 25, I often speak to them and say, when you hit 25, the services available to you are going to change drastically. And now you are essentially, in some ways, in competition for the resources that are available to ages 25, till, throughout older age. And so it's a very small window of time where people can hopefully be able to transition out of being homeless and into some kind of sustainable living. So with that population that we serve, we are, like I said, LGBTQ affirming, and that brings some very specific needs and scenarios that not everyone else faces. If you'd be willing, go ahead and switch to the next slide there. So in Nashville, and we know that this is a low number, but there's an estimation that there are about 20,000 people experiencing homelessness in Nashville. That number has fluctuates greatly and continues to grow. And to be able to get those hard numbers is very difficult, whether individuals are going to say, yes, I am experiencing this, or whether an individual who is experiencing homelessness is at a site or location where they can be found. Next slide, please. But to give you an idea, it's more people than would fit inside the Bridgestone Arena, whether you've been there for a game or a concert, and to really kind of be able to see that, when you're driving along, especially like in, the Nashville area, if you're driving along, you see individuals who are experiencing homelessness and, who are hungry, but then to kind of put into perspective all these different souls, there are so many people. And then you can even break down the segments there of, who are veterans, who are mothers, who are children, who's, young adults. And if we can go to the next slide. So the young adults face a very unique lack of access. Somewhere around ages 18 to 24 is the point where an individual may start to fall off the radar. They're no longer visually being seen by teachers, by caring community members. And so they just very much begin to lose all the resources at the same time. predominantly among 18 and 24, young African American individuals are the ones who are the majority of the population who are experiencing homelessness. Next slide. And so you can see here just with these numbers that the risks that anyone who's LGBTQ identifying faces versus an individual who's cisgender is astronomically higher. And we'll talk about some of the experiences of why individuals are facing those and the specific barriers that that they may find. All right, next. So with Launchpad, we work to create some kind of community, a network of lots of different organizations who are there to offer primarily at first street-free sleeping for those who are young adults. We do have shelters in town, but a lot of the shelters are pretty much aimed for those who have been experiencing homelessness for a while, those who I would say are almost kind of seasoned with that experience. But we have several young adults who are literally brand new. This is their first or second day that they don't have a place to call home, or their experience has been that they've just been couch surfing friend to friend to friend. And for that isolation, it is even more increased when you identify as LGBTQ. So we are there to provide street-free sleeping. We have a couple programs, and that includes an emergency shelter that November 1st through April 1st, we can have individuals come to one of our shelters, stay the night, and then return the next night and the next night and the next night. And then we also have a program that's about 120 days where individuals can come stay with us, and we have counselors to help them move towards acquiring the resources that they need. And when you think about the numbers, there's not enough help, but it makes a little dent in trying to be able to help individuals to be able to capture some of the resources they need, get their life back on track before they age into a point where the resources that are available become greatly diminished for them. Next. Just other pieces. We started in 2014, and throughout the pandemic, we had to adjust and pivot, and we are constantly adjusting and pivoting. And we've been proud to be able to host, over 1,500 guests. And we are well known in the community and have so many volunteers who support us because they do see the need for this specific population. All right, thank you on that. Again, this is just some of our programs. For time purposes, I'll let us, we'll just kind of go past this. We can kind of share some of the stories. Yeah, we can go past this one too. Thank you. But here is just, a demographic of like why or what was the story before some of our LGBTQ young adults came to us. And you can see predominantly is that it was not, nothing was within their power. They were sent away. And that point of being sent away was preceded by years and years, oftentimes of abuse, of neglect, of being forced to live a life that was not their own, living in danger. And those forced runaway mixed in with the family issues. Several who were in foster care and aged out, and why they were in foster care, often relates to those higher categories as well. Abuse at home. It was, the stories we hear, it's heartbreaking, and almost everyone has a story that they can tell. And then also the poverty that they might come from, where the family just does not have the resources. All right, thank you. What we try to do is we want to create a community that is not where we just allow individuals who are LGBTQ, but we affirm and celebrate individuals to come to us, because we realize what a difficult voyage it is to go to a place and say, I need help, but then especially to go to a place where you may not be part of a larger majority population, and where going to someplace might bring a sense of danger for yourself. And so we want to celebrate everyone who comes to us. All right. So I just wanted to be able to tell some of the experiences around food and nutrition related to some of our populations. I don't know if we need this screen or wherever it goes to, but that's up to you. Oh, okay, yeah, we can go back if you want. So I remember being in one one homeless shelter, and there was an individual who, as an adult, um, identified as transgender, but the shelter itself, this years ago, said, while you are out here with the rest of the population, you need to present as masculine. When you are in your own room, then you can dress as you wish. And the effect that had on that friend was so detrimental. Uh, they did not want to come outside of the room, and they felt as if they were doing something wrong. And it just created a terrible sense of identity of who they were. Now, the shelter itself, they were worried because they understood that if you are queer, if you are transgender in a homeless situation, then there's infinite danger that is presented to you. And that just illustrates how, yes, there are resources for people to be able to get food, and whether it's signing up, SNAP, WIC, or going to a soup kitchen, but to go and present yourself opens you to the possibility of being harmed, ridiculed. And so oftentimes we find that our young adults, they just won't go. They rather just stay in a car if they have one, or just stay alone, or oftentimes end up in a relationship with someone who is not kind, and where it is abusive, but it is a place where they can get food. Well, I had a communication with someone who is desiring to come to our shelter the other day and saying, "I'm hungry, I need a place to be, but I'm not allowed to leave, and I don't know of any safe place to go to get food and to get resources in order to come to you all there in Nashville." And so much of that is just because of how the world, and especially here in Tennessee, how it treats individuals who especially identify as transgender. One of the other pieces that we recognize, especially when it comes to nutrition, is the correlation of how one looks at their body and understands their body. Um, and many of our individuals that we work with have been made to feel that they are valued only if their body looks in a particular way, whether that is that their body looks in the way that their parents want it to look, or that their body looks in a particular way that would be appealing to offer them a safe, or, and I use quotes, a safe place to be because they're homeless. Their body has been either a commodity to survive in some way or another. And with that comes oftentimes the individuals we work with, they do not have any kind of a proper relationship with food, because food can help determine what your body's going to look like. And also, one of the other larger pieces is that many of our young adults had to flee or run away from home around ages 15 or so. And if, think back to 15, what were you learning at that time? Were you learning maybe the beginning pieces of how to drive and become independent, wash your clothes, prepare your own food, all those things? But if so many of our young adults come to us and they say, you know what, I'm really frustrated because people seem to know so many more things than I do. Like, I don't know how to fry an egg. I don't know how to wash clothes. I certainly don't know how to drive a car. I never got to see those kinds of things. And that lack of being able to have a constant home or individuals who care about you to support you and teach you those life skills creates um, a dependence on anyone or anything who can provide those things. And so there is a great lack of ability to get to those resources, and we can talk about some of the difficulties in trying to just be able to get documents as well. Let me stop for a moment, and kind of turn it back over to you all, and I don't want to keep talking. I want to bring space in here for the discussion that you want to bring there.
Yeah, that's great, Alec. Thank you so much for all of your expertise on this matter. And I'll also say that, living in the South, specifically Tennessee, like a lot of the service organizations that exist here are kind of wrapped up in that cultural element. They're often faith-based. And even if they are somewhere that a person in the situation can turn to, they might not be necessarily something that they want to approach because of that, because of their experiences with it. So I appreciate what you all do in that regard. And yeah, I'll go ahead and open up for questions. Feel free to put it in the chat, like I said, or raise your little virtual hand or come off of mute. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, Alec, thank you so much. We are so appreciative to have you here today to talk about your expertise with this. And I will include Alec on the email that goes out afterwards. If you have any questions you'd like to take offline. Again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Mhm. Sure, you're welcome. Yeah.
Awesome. Um, I will go on next and we will talk about some advocacy tactics. So here at TJC, we do several kinds of advocacy. We do legislative advocacy, so that's actually interacting directly with the legislature in order to have bills passed or not passed, depending on what the effect is. Administrative advocacy is going to be advocacy targeted at agencies and other decision makers that does not require legislation. Education is what we're doing right now. This also things like, email blasts and communication efforts to let people know what's happening. And then sharing stories is another big one. On our website, you can find our story bank with stories about how this affects real world people. Um, some things that we can do specifically to help. It's important to know that we've talked a lot about what the barriers are today. Advocacy is super effective, not only at fixing the issues that have come from those barriers, but also mitigating them altogether. And as we mentioned earlier, one of those barriers is going to be time limits. It's going to be work requirements. If you're in a population that historically struggles with finding and keeping work, and there's a barrier that exists that makes it harder because of that for you to access programs to help you keep yourself fed. Obviously, that's a barrier we want to get rid of, and if we can do advocacy to mitigate that, we will. And so, one of the things that we want to try to do in that regard is get rid of area waivers. I'm sorry, get rid of time limits. One of the ways we do that is with something called an area waiver. This is something that the state can apply for geographic locations that have higher than normal rates of unemployment. Um, in the past, Tennessee has had, I think it was something like 86 counties that were waived, and everyone in those counties were exempt from having to meet work requirements because there simply were not enough jobs. So advocating for things like that is going to be great. Another thing that we really would love to see is something called broad-based categorical eligibility, sometimes referred to called CAT-L. This essentially would expand who can be on SNAP and who can stay on SNAP because of something called the benefits cliff. Now, this is extremely technical, but essentially there's a mechanism in place where a person could get a minimal raise at their job, which would put them over the asset limit to be on SNAP, which would effectively reduce their access to resources by a larger amount than they got a raise for. Um, so in a lot of cases, this is you get a 50-cent raise, you lose all your SNAP. And so broad-based categorical eligibility is something that we can do administratively. We can do the agency can request. So we are trying to get them to do that as well. Another thing so that's all administrative. Otherwise, there's legislation. We haven't seen a lot of things. Obviously, this general session in Tennessee hasn't started yet, so we will be keeping an eye on legislation at the state level. For now, what we can talk about is legislation at the federal level. So this act, put forth by Barbara Lee, is called the Improving Access to Nutrition Act. This is one of many acts that would do some amazing things at the federal level for SNAP. This one specifically would remove the 3-month time limit altogether. It would remove it, statewide, remove it from the conversation altogether. We would love to see this. This is the gold standard. Um, Another thing that would be really, really helpful, I didn't mention this earlier, but you cannot spend SNAP dollars on food that is hot and prepared. So you can get a raw chicken from Kroger, but you could not go and get the rotisserie chicken that's already cooked and prepared. And so one of the things that we would love to see, because if you are somebody who doesn't have a space to store, cook, prepare, and eat food, um, you're very limited in what you can buy with your SNAP dollars. Oftentimes that means processed prepared foods that come in cans and bottles and boxes. So we would love to see people have the ability to spend their SNAP dollars on things that are already hot and prepared. And this act would do that as well at the federal level. So we would love to see this as well. Um, so how can you get involved? Well, the easiest way for any person to get involved in advocacy is to talk to your legislators, talk to the people that make these decisions. You can call them, you can send them a letter, you can send an email, you can schedule a visit with them if you're in Nashville or if you're heading to DC or anything like that. You can call ahead of time and try to schedule a meeting with them or one of their staffers. The more that they hear from us as individuals and as people, the more that they realize that, oh, this is our constituency speaking to us. And we are the ones who vote for them. Um, you can ask them to support specific legislation if you have something in mind, or just specific policy areas. Say we want you to bolster access to SNAP. And I've included here links to some really cool tools where you can find your federal and state legislators just by putting in your address. So these will be in the follow-up slides as well. Um, as far as education goes, we run a number of monthly and quarterly groups across program areas. So WIC, SNAP, school meals, Summary BT, which actually Summary BT are closed tomorrow. If you'd like to join us for that, shameless plug. And then we run a quarterly college hunger call to talk about the specific issues related to college hunger. SNAP actually works differently for college students, so we talk about that as well. Another great way to keep in touch with us is by joining our nutrition note. This is a monthly newsletter that we put out that has to do with all these things and the updates that are happening, events that are coming up, webinars we're doing. It's a great way to keep in touch. And then also, last thing, this is all the resources that I think are appropriate for this conversation. This top section is a lot of our resources that we put together. And then I've referenced all the things that I use as reference today. And then these last few are Tennessee-specific LGBTQ organizations. Tennessee Equality Project is a really great advocacy agency here in Tennessee that does a lot of what we do, similar to us, but specifically targeted to LGBTQ plus issues. Obviously, Nashville Launchpad's email or website is here. Out Memphis is it's an LGBTQ plus community center in Memphis that does a lot of great work. And then I've also included here Centerlink. So Centerlink is, they call it the community center of community centers for LGBTQ community centers. It's basically a network where you can find the community center that's most local to you. Um, the Johnson City Pride Center is part of Centerlink. Excellent, awesome, that's great. Yeah, I tried to do a little research about other places, but then I thought, that would make this list super long, so I just put Centerlink on there. It's good to know that Johnson City has a Pride Center. That's great. I love that. And feel free to share any resources you have. You can email me directly. You can send them in the follow-up email as a reply. You can send them in now, and I will make sure that they get where they need to go. And then just the last slide, this is our information. So feel free to reach out to any of us for any reason. We're here to help. And I will, at that point, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and hold just a little space for any questions or any comments, anything else. Okay, well, if nobody has anything, I will give you 14 minutes of your day back. Feel free to reach out at any time, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for being here, Alec.